Bon dia, welcome to Exploring Timor-Leste, the podcast that talks about Southeast Asia's best kept travel secret. I'm your host Jonty, and I'll share first-hand insights, expert interviews and practical travel tips. Whether you're a traveller, a culture lover or just curious about places rarely covered in the mainstream, you're in the right place. Let's explore Timor-Leste. Today's episode I'm going to talk about Baucau, which is both the second largest city in Timor-Leste and it's the name of a beautiful municipality, one of the 13 regions within Timor-Leste, also home to Venilale and Baguia, which also well worth visiting. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the city and then some of the things you can see near Baucau. Baucau is about 3 hours east of Dili. It's a beautiful drive through Manatoto into Baucau. It's one of the best roads in the country, both in terms of infrastructure being relatively new and well designed, and also in terms of the incredible views as you hug the coast. Baucau, although it is the second city in Timor-Leste, is about 1/15 the size of Dili. So it's quite a different experience. Pretty much everything that tourists want to see is in Old Baucau, which is the northern end of town. New Baucau is about 10 minutes drive up the hillside to the south. New Baucau is a typical Timorese town. There's a large market, there's a stadium, but there's not a lot from a tourist perspective. So you'll probably be spending most of your time downtown. There's quite a lot to see. It's definitely worth at least half a day to walk around and see the sights. My favourite site is the Old Market. This is a beautiful building built by the Portuguese between 1928 and 1934 as part of a grand master plan for the town. Back in Portuguese days, Baucau was home to the main airport for Timor-Leste, not the one in Dili. It still exists, it's still used, but not by commercial flights. The market was partially destroyed during World War II before being rebuilt in the 70s. It then fell into disrepair, but in the last 10 years it's been renovated. It has some lovely formal gardens around the back and it's just a very colourful and interesting building to explore. They may not always be open, but it's worth walking all the way around to checking if the gates are open, as often at least one is open. A bit of a hidden spot that I found by accident is Calvelio. This is a collection of shrines on the hillside, about 10 minutes walk from the centre of Old Baucau. So if you head out up the road to the east and then take a little turn off, it is marked on Google Maps. Now this is interesting both for the collection of Catholic shrines. There's a beautiful statue of the Virgin Mary, and it also offers probably the best views of the town and of the coastline. So you get spectacular views of there looking out towards Watabu Beach, and you can see back towards the city centre of Baucau. So I highly recommend visiting there. Back in Old Baucau, St. Anthony Cathedral is relatively new, but it's quite a nice cathedral. Baucau is famous, if I can use that word, for its swimming pool. It's probably one of the best in the country, although there's not a huge amount of competition, but it is a beautiful Portuguese era pool that was built by the nearby Pousada, which is quite an upmarket accommodation. It's famous for its pastel pink colour. That was built in the 1950s, and so they built the Pousada where you can stay now, and they built the swimming pool, the Piscina de Baucau. It's open 5 days a week, and it only costs 50 cents to go and swim in this beautiful natural spring-fed pool. Just bear in mind that on Mondays and Thursdays they drain the pool, which is quite interesting just to see an empty concrete pool, but you can't swim those days, so best to go on the other days. Now from Baucau, if you head north towards the coast, the road is quite winding but reasonable. A prominent landmark on the way is Fatuk Domin, which is an unusual rock arch with a tree growing on top. It's quite photogenic. It's not very well marked, but if you're heading towards Watabu Beach, you will drive past it on the right. Watabu Beach is a very picturesque palm-lined beach, but it's best to stay on the beach, not go into the waters, as crocodiles are often seen there. On my first visit there was a 4 or 5 metre crocodile happily swam by, and so I'd stay out of the water, but it's definitely worth visiting. Watabu Beach. It is a beautiful place. Heading out to the east of Baucau, there is a large military cemetery, which is one of 2 Indonesian military cemeteries in Timor-Leste. Originally there were 15, but they've consolidated them down to 2 to make them easier to maintain. So there's about 300 graves there. Quite a lot of those were relocated from other sites around Timor, and it's very different to a standard Timorese cemetery. It's very orderly, lots of white crosses, quite atmospheric. Heading south inland from Baucau, you head towards Venilale. On the way, there are some Japanese tunnels. So during World War II, the Japanese invaded Timor. There was a series of tunnels dug here, probably more likely by the Timorese locals rather than the Japanese, but they're interconnected and they're called either Japanese tunnels or the 7 caves because there are 7 interconnected tunnels which are worth an explore. Venilale itself is a pleasant small town about an hour's drive south of Baucau. There also has some nice Portuguese colonial architecture and there are some very photogenic rice fields and terraces nearby. During the Portuguese era, Venilale was a popular place for the Portuguese to escape the heat of the coast, and there is an old royal school, the Escola de Rino, which was one of only 2 public schools in the country when it opened in the 1930s. And during the Indonesian occupation, it was turned into an orphanage. The school is now a school. The building's seen better days, but it is quite atmospheric and definitely worth a visit. Opposite it is the main Catholic cathedral, and there are large local markets held in town on Wednesdays and Saturdays. There's actually quite a lot to do and see around Venilale. There's an interesting lake, there's some natural hot springs, there's a natural bridge, so it is worth some time there if you're having an extended stay in Timor. A couple of other towns worth noting in Baucau. So Vermasse is the first town you will enter when you cross into Baucau from Manutoto. That has 2 main sites. There's quite an attractive church which has seen better days. And then on the hillside above town are the remains of a Portuguese-era fort. There's not much left of the fort itself, but it does offer great views across the surrounding landscape and Vermasse River. Also on the way to Venilale is a small town called Gariuai, which is easy to drive through, but it is home to a giant colony of fruit bats, which is about 5 minutes walk behind the dark yellow church, which is quite an unusual design compared to most Timorese churches, and it also is home to a vast cemetery, which is probably the most scenically located in the country, with great views of Matabién in the distance. Matabién is the second highest peak in Timor. A bit of an unknown gem, and again one that's easy to miss if you're just driving through, but the town of Laga, which is to the east of Baucau, actually has quite a lot to do if you head off the main road. On the main road you will see the local church built in the 70s, which is very blue, and that's quite an obvious landmark. Across the road from it is a monument depicting Timorese being introduced to Catholicism by a Portuguese friar. Now if you take the parallel road up the hillside, there's the Portuguese era Laga fort, which is quite well preserved with a sort of standard square design with 2 round towers on opposite corners. Then if you head up the road towards Baguia inland, there's a series of 14 white crosses marking the stations of the cross, and you get beautiful views from that short walk. And if you continue up that road, there's a site with many umululiks, so sacred Timorese houses, and it's probably the best places I've seen in the country to see them because it's probably half a dozen umululik, and they range in design from traditional style thatch roof to more modern corrugated roof, so it's quite interesting, the different architecture over time. And if you continue up that road towards Baguia, there's a huge and very impressive cemetery dedicated to the martyrs of the struggle for Timorese independence from Indonesia. Heading up to Baguia, it is a very scenic but quite a challenging drive. Now, when I last visited in late 2024, there was a lot of work going on the road, which will improve things. But certainly as you head further inland, the road gets increasingly rough. You will need a decent 4-wheel drive or a motorbike with the skills to drive a motorbike across some very challenging stretches of road. But there's a number of interesting villages you'll pass through on the way, and there are very atmospheric ruins of an abandoned Portuguese school, which is about 1 kilometre before Baguia. Baguia is quite a challenge to reach, but it is the hub for those who are interested in hiking up Matabién, and is also home to one of the best forts in the country, which was built by the Portuguese at the end of the 19th century, so relatively new. It has a double perimeter wall and there's an inner wall home to 2 round corner towers, and in 2014 it was turned into a hotel, so it's quite an atmospheric place to stay. There are beautiful views all around. The fort came to prominence in 1959 when there was a rebellion, and at least 100 insurgents attempted to take the fort from the Portuguese, but they were repelled by the soldiers, but the fort was badly damaged at the time. So that's a bit of an overview of what you can do in Baucau. It is one of my favourite places in Timor-Leste for the variety of historical sites and also the beautiful landscapes. Thank you so much for listening to Exploring Timor-Leste. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving a rating or a review. It really helps more people discover the show. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email at exploringtimorleste@gmail.com. Until next time, Obrigado ho adeus.